Join me today as we talk about whether or not humans in Marvel should be afraid of mutants, and in particular, how people like various X-Men villains tend to exacerbate that situation. This is the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bobby, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about X-Men villains and how they affect public perception of mutants. Now, this doesn't apply to all X-Men villains, because there's a number of them who don't really affect public perception of mutants. Several of them are not mutants. This would be people like Mojo, for instance. Actually, before I continue, I realized in editing video part 1 that I might have glossed over something relatively important when trying to explain why people fear mutants over, say, Spider-Man or Thor or the Hulk. Mutants in Marvel have the X Factor gene, and because of that, they have superpowers. So I did kind of make the other video assuming people knew what I was talking about, so that part is kind of important if you don't. And people are born with the gene, and it either expresses or it doesn't. And usually it comes on somewhere around puberty, but it can come on later. And there are some of the superpowered individuals don't have the X Factor gene. They just have their powers because they were mutated by whatever. Then there is a comic series called Earth X, which takes the view that all superpowers are derived from the X Factor gene, but that is an alternate timeline, so that is not the outlook in the mainline Marvel Universe or in the movies. So, I should have mentioned that back in the first video, but there it is. So, a number of X-Men villains, however, do cause problems for other mutants. People like, well, you have the more basic level like Sabretooth, because Sabretooth is a known entity. It's known that he's a psychopathic killer who's completely remorseless and is hard to stop because of his mutant powers. So you have ones like him. They're dangerous, but they're not, hey, let's build an army of deathbots type dangerous. Then you have Magneto. Magneto is, let's build an army of deathbots type dangerous, because Magneto can shut down the planet because of his magnetic powers. And in X-Men 97 he does. So he can do that. Now the movie versions tend to be underpowered, and this is the same with most of the MCU characters as well. So movie Magneto, yeah, not so much. He probably couldn't. Maybe after X-Men Apocalypse he could have, because there his powers really got juiced up. But other mutants have those kind of powers too. The difference is Magneto always speechifies and is grandiose and is always constantly going on about mutant superiority. Now, in terms of raw power, he's not wrong. You know, I mean, he's more powerful than any regular human being who doesn't have superpowers. So, if you want to consider that superior, you know, there's an argument to be made there. The problem for Magneto is that he is essentially endorsing the same exact philosophy that the Germans used to kill his people in the 30s and 40s. And that's the tragedy of his character, is that he's become what he hates. He has probably become worse than what he hates in a lot of ways. Not necessarily a kill count, but you know, the lengths he's willing to go to. And so he's a problem. He's definitely a villain. So you have people like him who always go on about mutant supremacy. And Magneto in particular is also kind of hypocritical here, because he's always like, oh, well, mutants would do this and mutants would do that. And he acts like they're culturally and spiritually and mentally evolved. No, they're not. They're the same as human beings. They just have superpowers. They're no more enlightened than anyone else, as I mentioned back in the first video. And again, this is particularly a problem for Magneto, because Magneto's typical cohorts are people like the Juggernaut occasionally, who's not even a mutant, or Mystique, who's a cold-blooded killer, Toad, who's a Toad, a yes man, Avalanche, and people like this. Like, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants is what they chose to call themselves. Like, they're not good people. These people are not enlightened. They're not artists and philosophers on the side. No, they're killers and criminals. And, they're bad people. They're not... If I were to be like, hey, I need to set a good example here so that people will kind of buy into what I'm saying, let me stock my team with killers and thieves and other rogues. You don't do that. You build a team like the X-Men, where you have people like Cyclops, Jean Grey, Angel, Iceman. Not so much current Beast, but Beast for most of the last entire time the X-Men have existed. Even Wolverine is not an unrepentant killer like Sabretooth. Wolverine kills when he feels he has to. Now, he feels he has to a little bit more than most people probably should, but most of that is a recognition that if you don't end problems, they will come back. So he has a moral code. He is better than Sabretooth. And that's the kind of foot you want to put forward, okay? But then you have people that are even more extreme than Magneto, like Apocalypse. Now, Apocalypse has had thousands of years to formulate his plans and everything. And he is essentially Magneto's outlook taken to an extreme. Because Magneto, by virtue of believing that mutants are superior and they should rule and all this stuff, essentially believes in the concept of might makes right. It's basically what he believes in. So, Apocalypse is willing to take that one step further. Number one, he wants an all-out war between humans and mutants, because he wants to know who is going to win. He favors mutants because he is a mutant, and mutants have powers, so you would think they'd stand a chance, even with their dramatically lower numbers. However, he thinks that the fight still has to happen, and he's not overly inclined to tip the scales in anyone's favor, because he wants to know who will win. And he is he lives and dies by his philosophy. There have been times where it's been pointed out that if they do what they're going to do, he could very well die. And he's just like, well, then so be it, Live by the sword, die by the sword, essentially. So he believes in that fight, but he also believes in, like say the mutants do win, well, then he's going to want the mutants to fight it out among themselves, so that only stronger mutants are left alive, and then their progeny will be that much stronger. So he's very much a social Darwinist, and he speechifies about this, so the public is aware that he exists. He's addressed the UN before. Whenever mutants were reduced to 1% of their previous number by the Scarlet Witch, basically he went to the UN and said, you got two choices. Either you reduce the human population to 1% and then we'll fight, or I'll do it for you. He's like, you've got enough guns and bombs and bullets and everything. I'm sure you can figure out a way to do it. If not, I'll release a virus that'll do it. And like his second in command tried to convince him. He's like, well, why don't just make it lethal to all the humans? And he's like, you don't get it. Like, we actually need to know who's going to win. Like, I'm not going to tip the scales to mutants' favor. It's like the fight actually has to happen. But since we've been reduced to 1%, we're going to reduce them to 1%, and then we'll fight. So, you know, you've got people like him running around doing that. You have people like Fabian Cortez with the Acolytes, who preaches mutant supremacy. And, you know, again, you know, we've got people like Sabretooth, not so much preaching mutant supremacy, but just relishing killing regular human beings. So, and mutants too, but, you know, that doesn't quite make the news as much. So, you have things like this. Then you have events like whenever Onslaught appeared and wrecked New York City and appeared to kill most of the non-mutant heroes whenever he went down. So you have these very public incidents with mutant enemies who all seem to preach mutant supremacy. All are like, you know, death to the flat scans, and they're all in some kind of plan to eradicate humanity or enslave humanity, and they're very vocal about it. So this really, really exacerbates the situation, because you got the X-Men on the other hand, and again, they're kind of secretive. So humans are sitting there like, well, yeah, they're fighting these other guys, but what do we know about them? We don't know much. We know they're secretive. We know they hide. So can we trust them? And, you know, then the other mutants, where again, traditional comic book villains just aren't out doing that. Like, yeah, Doom wants to conquer the world, and Doom will preach about his own supremacy, but he's not sitting there saying that he and his progeny will rule the earth forever and ultimately supplant humanity. You know, he's not saying that. You know, the Mandarin's not saying that. Like Loki, you know, isn't saying that. Ultron is kind of saying that, but Ultron wants to kill everybody. So, he's a bit of an exception there. And again, people like the Red Skull actually do endorse this philosophy because they're German socialists from the 30s. So there are other villains that are kind of this way, but they're like one-offs. Like, people understand if Dracula is like, yeah, the vampires are going to rule the world. Well, they already consider vampires evil, so, you know, what do they care? You know, it's not like anyone's trying to like have good PR for the vampires here, and the vampires don't just spontaneously arise. So, you know, it's a different set of circumstances. So anyway, my main point is villains like Magneto and Apocalypse very publicly go on and on about mutant supremacy and death or enslavement for humans and this, that, and the other. And that really fuels the fire, because they're the ones that are out here like, whoa, we're the next step in human evolution. You know, that are really pushing all this, that make a very public face for it. And so you have other mutants, you know, you got regular humans that are sitting here like, well, you know, this guy wants to kill me just because I exist. And he seems to have plenty of followers. How many mutants really, you know, go in for what this guy's saying? And you don't know, because mutants tend to be more secretive, because society dislikes them, and it's a cycle, you know, it's hard to break out of, probably impossible, where behavior that makes sense can also be behavior that is used to justify acts against you. So, you know, I'm sure there's a little bit more to the metaphor in that particular aspect. So that's probably it for this video. Part 3, we're going to talk about the human reaction, mainly the Sentinels, and, you know, like on what scale is that or is that not justified? It's probably overkill. And probably going to talk a little bit about some potential alternatives that would probably be better, and talking a little bit about how does this fit into the greater MCU puzzle. So, and quick side note, I'm mainly talking about the comics in this episode and the cartoon. The Fox movies are a little bit different in that there's no other example. Okay, there is no Spider-Man, there is no Iron Man, there is no Hulk. The only people with powers are mutants. And of them, the very, very public ones are evil and are trying to conquer the world. So the rest of the humans are like, well, now hang on, these are the only ones we actually know about, and they're all bad guys. Like, we don't trust any of them. So the Fox movies is a little bit different situation. Just want to mention that. So anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. It's YouTube. If you didn't see video number 1, check it out. There's going to be at least a video number 3. I have to see once I've got that done where everything stands. Could be a part 4 where I kind of wrap things up, final thoughts, that kind of stuff. Unless I think of another kind of branch to the topic, in which case there'll be a full part 4, then maybe a part 5. But anyway, thank you folks for watching, and remember, welcome to the X-Men. Hope you survive the experience.